And remember, gift certificates are available for any special occasion.
Quick, hit the subscribe button.
The show.
Tubular.
Dio, God. From the Latin, Deus.
DioField Chronicles would have sounded too cool, so Dio will have to do. So did DioField live up to its heavenly ambitions, or has it Dio-failed? Released September 22nd, 2022, well, for most of the world, I and probably many other people were punished for pre-ordering the preposterously priced collector's edition set that includes the game with the DioField Chronicles pin set and the DioField Chronicle board game, which I will probably never play. Tracking the package the days before release, I realized I wasn't going to get the game until the week after it came out. When pointing out to Square Enix support that I had spent over $200 and was being penalized for being an early adopter.
Calling the Square Enix Support Center. Your call may be monitored or recorded for quality assurance purposes. Please listen closely as our menu options have changed. For all support related to Final Fantasy XIV, press 1. For all support related to Final Fantasy XI, press 2. For all support related to Marvel's Avengers, press 3. For all other issues not related to our online Final Fantasy or Marvel's Avengers titles, such as warranty or merchandise orders, or problems with the Square Enix member site, press 4.
They sent me a digital code. I had joked before that they could use some of my useless Square Enix store reward points, but I didn't actually imagine they would so easily give in to my passive-aggressive demands. I loaded up the PlayStation Store and put the code in. They'd sent me a code for my pre-order bonus items, not a digital download code for the game. Thanks, Square.
How are you?
Not great, Bob.
What's wrong?
What's wrong? Don't play dumb.
Co-developed by Square Enix and Landcars, the staff includes some bona fides. Concept artist Isamu Kamiko Kuryu, art director for Final Fantasy XII and XIII, character designer Taiki, sound composers Ramin Djawadi and Brandon Campbell, composers for Game of Thrones, scenario writer Oshima, scenario writer for Fire Emblem Awakening, Fates, and Heroes. The two least notable of the group being the director and the game director. I don't know what the difference between the two is, but game director / art director Takahiro Kumagai, director / battle designer Hirofumi Fukuya. The directors have random credits for lesser roles in other games throughout the years that I'll flash up on screen now, but nothing noteworthy enough for me to verbalize. And as we'll get to shortly, there might be a reason for that. Gameplay. You control 4 characters in a battle system that is close to Final Fantasy VII Remake, but from a top-down perspective, like a MOBA, like Dota. I say it's like Final Fantasy VII R because it's immediate and flashy, but with allowances for some strategy by giving the player the power to essentially freeze time. And no one will make this observation but me, but DioField Chronicles has some interesting parallels to Ogre Battle 64. You direct your units by pinning a line to where you want them to go, and you can set 2 waypoints on the way to your destination. Okay, that might be it. Both games are weird tactic strategy hybrids that take place in real time but allow you to pause as much as you'd like. There are 4 main character types with some customization: melee, mounted, ranged, and magic. Each unit can have a partner as well to extend their skill set in the same class or create a hybrid between 2 of the 4 classes. Each class has different special skills that work on a cooldown and take EP to perform. The main character, Andreas, yes, this game has a main character, for example, has a skill called Assassination that deals extra damage when performed from behind, and the cooldown gets reset automatically if dealing the finishing blow. Coordinating your units in ways to achieve unity between your skills is where DioField shines.
Form ranks! Forward! We'll hold them here. Think you can escape?
And the snappiness of battles, most of which take 5 to 10 minutes at most in real-world time, paired with the constant unlocking of new items, character abilities, characters, skills, and summons, had me hooked for the first half of the game.
I'd rather not get involved, to be honest.
The problem with DioField is the later half of the game. It might vary depending on how many of the optional missions you choose to do, but for me, DioField ran out of new enemy encounters or just anything interesting or challenging way too early in the game. I wasn't grinding or over-leveling either, I promise. Andreas's assassination move, plus my other 3 characters' chaining AoE attacks that caused status effects that then multiplied my damage output, resulted in no survivors. The enemies were such pushovers that I never even had to use my TP. TP is gathered throughout the battle to fill up circles on your Magilumic orb gauge that allows you to summon Final Fantasy favorites like Bahamut and Fenrir, but half the battles I had no need. This game also has items, but I never had to use those either. In the entirety of the game, I lost 1 unit for a few seconds before reviving them, and that only happened because my roommate came in the room and I turned my head just long enough for a Gigas unit to pull off a strong attack. Did they stop introducing new, more challenging enemies? Did they just run out of ideas? That brings us nicely to our next topic, story.
An island named DioField. Long known as the home of the gods, the island has basked in nothing but peace for centuries.
What makes a good story? What makes a good story in a video game? It's a lot easier for me to tell you what makes a bad story, or at least in DioField's case, what makes a hollow story. You start the game out with a flashback. Andreas and Fredret, your 2 mainest characters, watch their friend get assassinated. Their friend, the 4th prince in the succession of the royal line. Many years later, they are now mercenaries. They happen upon Lorraine Luckshaw, her carriage upturned by bandits. They rescue her, and since she conveniently works for Duke Hende, they now go from being mere mercenaries to Duke Hende's special mercenaries. What the story does right is plant some seeds at the beginning with the flashback. Andreas is much more interesting than most fantasy RPG protagonists because he isn't a Genki do-gooder.
I'm Genki. My name means energy and no one can compare to me.
Who is oblivious to the machinations of those around him.
You know, you're quite the mystery yourself, Andreas.
Oh, yes. Andreas is always holding something back, my dear Iscarian.
The demo lets you explore the world through the library, a feature that gives you access to enough DioField lore to convince the average fantasy nerd that this is a thought-out, fleshed-out world, as all get out. Again, there's that promise. You, the game, tells me to have an expectation of a world, and then you show me almost none of it. We have our home base, Elm Camp, our hub. This, aside from a tiny tent later on, is the only area where you can freely explore. I like it. It's got a nice homey feel about it, but that's it. And I know what you're thinking, Evan. Final Fantasy Tactics doesn't even have that. It's just nodes and menu screens except for the battles. Yes, but the story cutscenes breathe life into Ivalice, to where I believe it exists beyond the screen. The cutscenes in DioField are about as basic as they get, and the world of DioField feels as fake and brittle as the clay skin of the game's character models. Some will be able to stomach the internal inconsistencies of DioField, but when I talk to one of my team members after a battle, and then am awarded 1,000 gold for no communicated reason, I
It
shudder.
doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. It's about finding your own path. That's what matters.
I see.
Are my NPC friends so desperate for attention that they'll pay me for a little gab like I'm a conversation whore?
I thought you were different.
Of course, it's just the game incentivizing side quests without integrating the why into its own narrative.
You made me feel I could return to the world and find something decent.
It's lazy, uninspired, and baffling when looking at how much time and effort went into the other aspects of the game.
Oh, it's too much. I simply can't resist any longer.
You lie, then you betray, and then you laugh about it. You are unclean.
I'm always happy to do the dirty work, you know.
And it's those good parts of DioField that make these transgressions so offensive. The art, the music, the character portraits, the combat system, it's all solid. It's just like they ran out of steam before they could add enough to make it feel like a complete story. One of the many main problems with the story is faceless villains. I'd say more than 70% of the antagonists are covered in a helmet or hood to where you never see their face. And I don't think you need to be a YouTube SEO specialist to understand why faces might be important if you want people to get attached to your characters. One faceless antagonist is fine, as long as their facelessness is purposeful. But how exactly do you think a player is going to get all fired up fighting Dalmasio when they can't tell the difference between that guy and a random judge from Final Fantasy Tactics Advance?
Andreas, I've been wondering, would you mind telling me a little bit about yourself?
What? Why now, all of a sudden?
I have worked with the Blue Foxes for a long time, and yet I know very little about you.
The biggest misstep and what probably sabotages the story ultimately is the thing I praised at the beginning, the main character's crypticness.
I suppose we'll have to ask them about that, won't we? Though, I imagine they'll be tight-lipped.
Huh?
DioField generates that compulsion to know more about the main character at first, and then does nothing to sustain it. Madman's mystery plot about the identity of Don Draper is a great example of how to have a main character that is mysterious without it becoming exasperating.
Donald Draper? What kind of name is that?
Just as with Twin Peaks' murder mystery, you use Draper as a gateway to explore other characters and the world. He's not the sole focus of the show, but he's the core. Even when we don't understand Don Draper's past, we can see it affect him. Nothing seems to affect Andreas, and since he's unaffected by the events of the story, why should we be? The story barrels from plot setup to justify a battle to the next setup with very little changing in DioField or our characters. I'm sure it's all a commentary on the futility of politics, government, and life, and has nothing to do with poor pacing, underdeveloped characters, and generic scenarios. Andreas could have been a standout example of an anti-hero in a JRPG.
What's the matter, Rias?
How did you know it was me?
Well, you do have a certain aura.
If the developers or the writers had spent more time building a multi-level narrative, occasionally punctuated by Andreas' revelations, then they might have had something. But instead, we go from encounter to encounter, gaining gold and skills, but very little insight into our characters from the story. The only two exceptions being the two most interesting relationships of the game, but even those are fumbled. Waltequin is easily the best part of the DioField Chronicle.
Greetings, everybody. My name is Waltequin Redditch.
Have you ever watched a boring movie and thought, I wonder how much better this would be if they just put a batshit motherfucking crazy person in the story for no reason? Well, someone on the team did, and we are forever graced with Waltequin.
My dear Andreas Ronderson.
Yes.
Wow, I wasn't expecting this.
Walter Quinn is introduced as your white mage, traditionally a Madonna-type character. This white mage, looking the part, sporting all white all the time, plays against type so hard it occasionally breaks the fourth wall. No subtlety, no sudden moment of disbelief. No. Walter Quinn is legit, ridic, for real. Runner-up for character to give a shit about is Iscarion. Hair God and Archer, he's the only character in the game that has at least the beginning of an arc. He lives by his principles and styles himself a knight-errant, happy to forsake status in exchange for conscience. As the story progresses and his ideals become perpendicular with Andreas, he parts ways with the company. Walter Quinn and Iscarion leave the story abruptly, and leave in such a way it seems obvious that they'll re-enter near the end. They don't. So, in the briefest way I can manage, DioField fails due to implying it's one of the big boys. It lacks the scale or depth of story or combat that would have made it great. The one memorable part of the game, Walter Quinn, is snuffed out before it can blossom, and the ending will have those who suffered through the final season of Game of Thrones suffering PTSD. Square Enix and Landcars either didn't feel confident enough in their own world to explore it, or ran out of time and budget and were forced to shore up what they had and ship it. On the plus side, the game is mercifully short, and we need more short RPGs, God knows looking at my backlog. Maybe Square realized they had Tactics Ogre Reborn coming out in November and knew DioField would have its lunch money eaten by a real god of a game. My pet theory is that DioField was supposed to be some sort of Final Fantasy XVI spin-off, due to all the Final Fantasy summons, and when it didn't stack up or come along fast enough, they made do with what they had. Did I gain anything from my experience with DioField? The game was fun for at least 12 to 15 hours. The gameplay loop of snappy battles, lining up ambush attacks, strategizing combinations of skills and weapons and loadouts, did hook me at first. There is some fun to be had with the gameplay, as you're unlocking those new skills, weapon summons, and figuring out all the best ways to maximize the damage output. Maybe just wait until it goes on sale. Or, if you're interested in a collector's edition and like new condition, for the low price of $190 US. Oh yeah, the music. The guys who will forever be known to most people as the Game of Thrones guys did the score, and you guessed it, just like everything else at DioField, it kind of gets old after the halfway mark. They did a little video interview on Square Enix's YouTube page, and it sounds like they had fun making it at least. It is pretty, and gives off the grand scale the game wants to have. In the future, though, maybe include a few more battle themes in a game that's 95% battling, on the next episode. Probably either Front Mission Remake or Tactics Ogre Remake. And people say I don't play new games.
Well done!